All right. Welcome, everybody, and welcome back to episode 3 of What's on Your Workbench. That's right. This is in the world of Vegas buffet of podcasting. We are the prime rib. Unless you're a vegetarian, in which case we're something green and tasty. But this time on What's on Your Workbench, we will be answering life's deepest question: what is on your workbench? So, for those of you who are new, my name is Chili, and across from me, as always, is the illustrious Andrew. I am in the US, and Andrew is in Australia, which usually doesn't matter except for this week when we had daylight saving time and I messed stuff up. But we've made it and we're here. So we are going to be talking to each other about what is on our workbenches. So without any further ado, Andrew, what is on your workbench?
And we're just getting right to it. So I think I've mentioned this a few times, but this is why I'm looking at my workbench and it is an absolute mess. I actually had to move the stuff on my workbench to be able to set up the podcast, which is counterproductive. But yeah, and it's like, this is what my workbench lives to be like. I clean it up once every couple of weeks or at the end of a project. But currently on my workbench is a cosplay. Well, it's not really a cosplay. It's more of a costume for a costume party. But I'm going to call it a cosplay because that's how I treat it, because when I go deep, I go hard, and my wife is already shaking her head at me with this project because it's just a simple one. So I have a question for you before we get into it. Have you seen the movie about some dinosaurs that was released in about 1995 or 94, I think it was?
Was that Babar? No, that's an elephant.
Yeah, that's an elephant. No. So of course I'm talking about Jurassic Park. So this is an all-time favorite movie of ours. I mean, as a kid, loved dinosaurs. This is kind of one of those first live-action movies that wasn't a kid's movie that I just latched onto and loved. But really, that has nothing to do with it. It just was a convenient costume to put together. However, in your mind, if you were asked to describe Dr. Alan Grant, well, given his appropriate status, his hat, how would you describe it to me?
Ooh, it's not quite a Stetson shape. I mean, it's white. That's the biggest thing, was that it was white. And I honestly can't even remember what material it was or anything, but it has that very telltale kind of mostly flat brim. You know, the dome of the hat is shaped prominently. It's almost kind of like a mix between like a Stetson and like that Indiana Jones kind of hat.
Yeah, like a fedora.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that when you think about it in your head, you're just like, it's just a hat, right? I always thought it was like a felt hat that had been shaped and had a leather band and it was white and just got all dingy. But then you go down the rabbit hole. And so as I do with my projects, I want to get it as close as I can. And so I started doing more and more research, and you find out that it's actually a leaf-based hat. So it's a kind of like a woven, like a modern Stetson. Like if you've ever held one of them, they're kind of like a crispy, hard. It's almost like that, but it's softer than that. I'm sure there's hat people out there that can correct me. I'm definitely not an expert. But yeah, there's actually like there is a weave to it. So it's definitely not like a felt hat, which is what I would have just assumed. I mean, coming from Australia land, we have a Kubras, and, you know, they're very predominantly felt, rabbit felt hats. So that's kind of what I thought it was. And it turns out his hat in the third movie is actually more that style. But then with the hat band, I thought it was just a leather hat band. But oh, how I was wrong. So being the cheapskate that I am, we were at the local thrift store or op shop, depending on what you want to call it, and I found a hat for $4. We'll set it on top of my headphones, and it wasn't quite right. So according to all the resources, you need a 3-inch brim. The hat that I originally had was a 5-inch. So first thing I had to do was cut it down. So I cut the brim down, and then I folded it over and sewed it. And then, like you said, the distinct thing is the shape. You know, you've got this pinch in at the front, you've got kind of a tight edge around the top, and then you've got this overall shape. This one's probably a little bit floppy at the moment. Now, fortunately, this kind of fibrous reed, whatever they use, it's fairly shapeable. So I ended up just dumping a buttload of starch on it, just spray starch, which for the record cost more than the actual hat. Who knew? And it's actually held its shape really well. So overall, that was going great. And I was like, we're flying through this. This took me an hour, maybe tops, to get this beautiful shape. And then it came to the hat band. Now, what do you know about horsehair, Chili?
I know that there's a lot of uses for horsehair. The two that come to mind for me are, one, using it in, you mix it in with like plaster of Paris. Yep. To give it more structure and help it hold together. 2 is the use of horsehair knots at the end of bullwhips, which actually do provide that really loud crack in a high quality whip.
So would you be surprised to find out that it's actually not a common, but it is quite often used as decorative, like for bracelets, for hat bands. I mean, I assume it's by those equestrian type people that love their horse, which obviously they should, and they want a memento from their horse. So they take the horsehair and they braid it into beautiful weaves and they make it as a bracelet. But it's also very common for hat bands. And this led to, oh man, a week of pain. It was rough trying to figure out how to do this, because it's one of those things. I'm used to a world where if I want to know how to do something, if I can buy it, somebody knows how to do it. So there's a machine that knows how to do it. But then there's also somebody else in the world that's cheap and wants to know how to make it themselves. And then there's enough of those people that they decide to share that knowledge. But when it comes to horsehair headbands, so far I have been unsuccessful in the full process of how to create one. So I got to do what I actually really love doing and just make it up as I went along. So obviously the hardest part for me was I don't have a horse. There's not one hiding out here. And although it did enter my mind, I know where some live, to sneak in the night and get some. I thought better of that. My wife was laughing at me when I described that plan. And then she suggested her hair, which I had actually thought of as well. I was like, probably not quite long enough. So things were getting quite desperate. But that was okay. It was okay. I came up with a plan. So I ended up finding a real fine cotton crochet thread. So it's almost like an embroidery thickness thread. And then I had some really thin string. And that was kind of going to give me my my contrast, so my light and my dark. So I had a material. It was then, how are we going to make it? So I started researching friendship bracelets, horse weaving. I found one video on YouTube that showed me how to do a horsehair weave, but that was only 20% of the process. And then there was another one that just kind of did a basic plait, which wasn't particularly useful for what I needed. But then I could find lots of resources of purchasing one. So to put it in perspective, this whole hat probably cost me $4. You can see that's not quite dry yet. Around the top, it's still drying out. The hat cost me $4, $5 for the starch, a bit of leather, and some string. So, I'm under $10 into this hat. If you wanted to buy a replica, you'd be about $140 into the hat, plus another $50 for the horsehair hat band. So obviously it wasn't something I could just go and, I'll just go buy that because I can't be bothered making it. It was way out of budget. So I had to really figure out how to do this horsehair. And in doubt, you always go back to your resources. So there are a couple great pictures of the hat, the real original hat from the movie. And you can kind of start to detect how this is done. And even in sellers' descriptions of hat bands, because you can buy all these variety of hat bands, you start to kind of break it out. And so this hat band was always described as a 5-part horsehair band, hat band. But the five part kept throwing me, because I'm like, how do they get that kind of thickness from 5 threads? Do they use like a bunch of hairs and then thread it? But then I couldn't find a weave that replicated the really complicated weave. And what I came to find out, or what I determined, and this is again just really kind of a guess from my side, is they basically do a weave. They do 5 different weaves and then they join them together. Now, at this point, I have no idea how they actually join those 5 together. But on closer examination of the resource, I could see a leather band hidden behind it. So it looked to me like it was attached to a leather band. So that's what I ended up doing. So you can kind of see the complexity in there. Now, I'm not that happy with it. So it's time for me to just put this down and not look at it for a couple of weeks. And then I'll probably be happy with it. But yeah, it's been kicking my butt all week. And the middle part of it ended up being an 11 thread weave. And then the outer ones were just like a 3-part plait. And then I just used some contact cement onto a headband, and there we have it. So, and then some tassels, which I might change a little bit. I was just kind of throwing it together last night because I wanted to be done with it. Con crunch is real, my friend. Con crunch is real, even though the party's only in like 2 weeks, but there's more to do. So yeah, that's that, with a couple of other things that I've been working on for the costume. So I've been, yeah, but did you have any questions about the hat? I think I covered everything forever and ever on that. So many. It's
the first thing that really stuck out to me was you said that when you trimmed the brim down, you folded it over and sewed it?
Yep. It's amazing what you can put through a sewing machine.
Huh.
And I have put a lot through a sewing machine.
So did you have to like apply some sort of, heat to it when you bend it over to get it to stay enough to sew? Or yeah, okay.
So I just used an iron, and then I've got a million bulldog clips, and just folded it over. But it actually, because of this style of hat with the weave, you can see these very distinct ridge lines, and so it naturally wanted to fold on those lines. So that was actually one of the easiest parts. I thought it was going to give me a lot of trouble trying to get it to, yeah, like you said, fold that edge. But it actually worked out. That was probably one of the easiest things. I thought that would be the hard part and the hat bend would be the easy part, but it ended up being the other way around, which is, with some of these projects, you just never know, especially when you're in territory that you've never experienced before.
So did you have any trouble when you folded it over? So you're taking a part of the brim that has a larger diameter and you're forcing it into a smaller diameter. Did you have problems with it bunching at all?
You do see a little bit of it, like probably there and there. You can kind of see hints of it. And this is why I think on the proper hats, it'll actually have like a binding around it. They're not just folded over. But this hat, the way it was when I bought it, was folded over. And then there's obviously a telltale mark where the spiral ends. And there's not much you can do about that. But yeah, no, there wasn't really, I was expecting more issues, but that weave has a bit of flex in it, so you can stretch it and push it, as opposed to like a rigid fabric. So yeah, I was expecting a few more issues with that, but once you kind of sewed it and then just hit it with the iron, it flattened right out with no problems. And then it almost naturally just got that beautiful shape. I really didn't have to do too much to it. It was more the top, which I had to kind of work a little bit to get it right.
Yeah, what did you use to ease your shape into the top of the hat?
I just used the clips again and some little clamps, and just kind of, I starched it, and I mean, you can see it's still wet, but yeah, and then I just basically held it there overnight, and then it pretty well just held its shape. Yeah,
that's interesting, because I know there are a lot of specialty tools involved with making and shaping hats. Like,
Oh yeah.
it's an impressive craft. I don't know, when you guys were here in Colorado, did you ever go to the National Western Stock Show?
No, no.
So, Colorado, Denver specifically. Well, actually, in Colorado Springs, we have the National Rodeo
Yep.
Museum and Hall of Fame. And we have one of the largest stock shows in the nation, if not the largest, which is the National Western Stock Show, which happens every January. And I grew up going to that as a kid. And there's vendors, all over, and you can watch them. You can buy a hat that's just like stock, and they'll shape it right then and there. And they have these awesome like head-shaped irons. Like it's really bizarre, but it's so cool. And it sounds like you landed exactly, or if not pretty close to the process they do use in making those horsehair bands, which is, I know you're right on the 5-part, at least. That does mean that there are 5 braids, or 5 different weaving designs that are put together. And I believe they do usually stitch them, and I think it's usually hand stitched to a leather band using horsehair as thread. Is the, I think, authentic way to do it. That's really cool stuff. I wonder if I could poke around here in person, and maybe find more resource on that, because that's something that's probably a little bit more prevalent stateside.
Yes,
we still have a disgusting infatuation with cowboys.
Yep,
me included.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things, and I think a lot of the manufacturing now is in Mexico, which, I mean, the cowboy history is very much steeped in the Mexican history. So yeah, no, it's funny, one of those things that you first look at it and you're like, how do they do that? And then you just kind of keep going back to your resource. You start looking online. And like I said, I ended up being able to determine a lot of it from looking at just one website that sold 3-part headband, 5-part headband, 7-part headband, and then just kind of looking as close as I could. It was like, okay, this is how they're doing that. But yeah, it's one of those things where Miriam even tried to crochet one, because we just couldn't figure out how to make it happen. And then I was like, oh yeah, that didn't quite work out. So that's when I kind of went, well, let's just try this plait and see what happens. And yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy. I think I need to mess with the tassels a little bit, but yeah, good fun. First time ever messing with a hat.
One of the things that's really, I think, interesting about horsehair, and probably was made easier with the way you did it, is that, you said it's not very long. Even when you get tail pieces, it's not terribly long. But what's actually most prevalent is mane hair, is what is most often used. And I know that the braiding techniques they use are really similar to French braiding, or styles of braiding you'll find in Africa and the Caribbean. Because the hairs are so short, you're actually weaving the start of new hair into your and there's actually a really interesting weaving technique that was really prevalent in the southeast US, Florida in particular, that native tribes used to make baskets, and they used long pine needles.
Oh wow!
And it's a similar kind of weaving technique to bring in those pine needles to create a larger, piece.
You can
that's
keep
a total side note.
Yeah, you can keep splicing in these additional things as needed. Yeah.
So, is there anything you would do differently if you were to tackle this again?
I just buy the hat. No, this is the problem, right? I look at this now and go, this is a great hat for a costume, but it's not necessarily a prop that I would want to have on display. Well, if I can get it closer, then it moves from just being a costume piece to being a prop. But other than that, I mean, it did exactly what I want on a budget, on a time, especially from a distance. I'm quite happy with that. I mean, I think if I was going to do anything, it would be like purchasing some horsehair and just giving it a go, just to, see how hard it was and do it with the actual proper resources. But like most things, I'm probably on to the next project before I can delve too deep into it.
I think it turned out pretty awesome. I can't wait to see it with the rest of the costume. That's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, and the rest of the costumes wasn't too bad. I got to do a bit of leather work over the week, making some holsters for some different bits and pieces, which I haven't been able to do some leather work for a while. So that's always good fun. But yeah, no, the hat band really is what's been kicking my butt. So Chili, I think it's your turn now. What's on your workbench?
Well, I believe in my little teaser last week, I showed you this rectangular piece of metal, which I welded together. This is going to be for an urn, so it's going to hold someone's cremains. And the first thing I did, what I had done last week was just I had the box, kind of welded together, just the four sides of the box, and that's fun to get things square when you're welding, because as you put heat on a corner, so like as I weld like this corner, if I put tack welds on the outside, that heat pushes the metal apart a little bit, and then as it cools, it pulls it together, so it'll pull your corner out of square. So you have to hold your piece square until the weld is done and cooled, at least majority of it. So that was, the first fun part, was just getting this actually square. And now what I've been working on is doing some finish work to this piece. So you can see like this end here, I got my welds all ground down smooth so that I have nice corners. And that leaves some pretty deep and nasty marks on metal when you're doing that, because that's an angle grinder is basically what you're using, with progressively finer grits to get it, as cleaned up as possible. But then this blue stuff on here, you see, that is actually Bondo. So it's body filler, like you would use on a car nowadays.
I've never used Bondo on a car, but I've used it a lot.
yeah. I mean, it's good stuff. It's a learning curve to use it. It takes some getting used to. For me, I learned how to do that kind of stuff with molten lead, is how I learned when I was a kid, which is a very old school way of doing body work. But this one, well, I didn't have the time or space to do that, so Bondo had to suffice. But this is just what's called a skim coat. So it's just a really, really thin coat of this filler material to even out any of the blemishes put into the metal by the abrasives on the power tools. So you can actually see, when you look at here, it's not all blue. And that's because you're not putting a big thick coat on here. All I'm doing is filling the imperfections. And then this is sanded down to 320 grit, so that I can apply the paint, which is a Venetian bronze paint. I still have a couple more coats to do. And then when I'm done with the paint, I will then go in and wet sand that surface. And I'll do that down to 600 grit, just to get it completely smooth and spotless, one glassy piece. But it will still be a matte finish with this paint. And then, once I get it wet sanded, the metal part will be done. And I can move on to the top and bottom, which are going to be elm, which I have right here. Nice big old 2-inch thick chunk of elm. The top will be 2 inches thick. and the bottom will be about a half inch is what we'll reveal on the bottom. And it will be, attached to the bottom. The lid will be removable with a gasket material around it so that it fits nice and snug. And then I still have to, the top piece, once I get it done, I'm going to inlay a piece of maple into it. And that's the piece that I'm going to chip carve the person's name in. So still a lot to do on this one, but it's plugging along.
Wow, that's a lot of work. How do you feel about doing all that metal work and then kind of filling it up with Bondo? Because to me, I love seeing the raw material come through. I assume this is for a client, I assume. So I'm sure there's some requests there, but I guess, what are your thoughts on that process? I guess, yeah, for me, Bondo is fine on anything, but on metal, I'm like, oh, you did all this work with metal. And then it's kind of like, yeah, I don't know. How do you deal with that?
Well, for me, it really depends on the aesthetic that you're going for. I really like the aesthetic of raw metal. I like the texture of it. For me, one of my favorite ways to actually finish off steel in particular, like if I were doing this just for me, for my tastes, not for me like my body, but for my taste, I would have ground the metal down to bare steel, make sure I had a nice clean surface, and then I would have heated it with an oxyacetylene torch to get it warm and open up the pores of the metal. Then I come back through with a paste wax and rub that paste wax on while it's hot, and it absorbs that wax, and as it cools, it turns jet black. And it's a really awesome finish. I use it a lot on hardware, like when I hand hammer out handles or whatever for barn doors, stuff like that. That's kind of my go-to finish for those, because it's a really rich, deep, beautiful finish. But for this, which is more of a modern aesthetic, with very clean lines and very simple, you really can't get that without using some form of filler.
Okay.
And it's the same on a car. When I use molten lead on a car to do body work, there's certain paints that goes with to be, period correct. And that creates a different look than does a skim coat of Bondo or plastic, and then paint. And I think they're equally beautiful when executed correctly. Some people look at Bondo as cheating. If you're not doing the proper work ahead of your Bondo, then yes, it is. If you have a dent in a car, and instead of taking the time to do the metal work to pull that out and get it as close to perfect as possible before doing your skim coat, yes, you're cheating, and you have an inferior product, when you're done. But there's equally as much work involved. Either way, it's just a different process for a different outlook or outcome.
Yeah, I mean, it's better to think of it as the first layer of paint, and then the primer, and then your top coat, rather than thinking of it as part of the bodywork in this case, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I mean, you cannot get a perfectly glossy, kind of mirror reflection paint job without doing a skim coat. It doesn't work.
Yeah. How did you come up with this design? Because it's it kind of appeals to my sense of design, like very simple, very clear. You've got these two types of materials, but it's very overkill by the sounds of it, like 2-inch elm, and that box isn't going anywhere. I guess, did you kind of suggest this design, or did they come to you with this kind of, how did that process work?
Well, first of all, no, it's not going anywhere. Just the metal alone weighs 11 pounds.
That's 5
but
kilos for the rest of us normal people.
yes, for those of you who use an intelligent measuring system. It's my client brought to me the desire for a classy but rustic piece is what they want. And they know that most of my custom work is a combination of wood and metal, hence the name of my business, Or Wood Solutions. I really like the way that the two materials play together. So they also brought their idea to me the way that I prefer people to do it, which is that they research my body work, they know what I do, bring me some guidelines and say, this is what it has to do, this is what it has to fulfill, but other than that, go for it. So I really enjoy that because I enjoy the design, and I it's an intensely personal part of the project to me. When I have clients that do bring me something, a picture of something, and say, "Hey, can you build me this?" I tell them yes, but I won't. And if that's what you want, I will gladly put you in touch with some other really great craft workers who will do that for you. But it's just not the way I work.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I explain it to people that it's like getting a tattoo.
Yep.
Like
it's a piece of art. So
yeah.
Well, it's interesting because for me, I am the complete opposite. First thing I do when I have something in mind is, where's my reference? I need a picture. I need a picture of what it is. And then as soon as I've got what it is, very rarely does it end up, well, it depends on what, if it's a replica, I want it to look exactly. But there's a lot of things that I do that I have a certain need, but I don't have any plans. So I find something I like, and then I take that and I modify it. But yeah, it's definitely, I mean, I think it speaks to you as a designer and a craftsman that level of like, that's how you define your work. While it's like, for me, it's all about what the end result is. And I'm less concerned about how I got there. It's like, whatever it took me to get there, I don't care. Like, just get me to the end. It's just, yeah, really fascinating.
I think part of that is that I generally work with a more limited palette of skills than you do.
I work with none, so it's fine.
Yeah, like you approach. I mean, you were looking at horsehair weaving, working with the palm of that hat, leather work. Like you have this like huge array of stuff that you do. I'm a lot more limited in most of my work, in my my business.
I wouldn't say limited.
Wood and metal.
I'd say focused.
Focused, yeah.
Limited isn't the right word. You're definitely not limited.
Which allows me to be pretty comfortable with the skill set that I have, and being able to say, this is what I need to accomplish. I know that I have these skills and tools to accomplish it with. That's a little bit easier puzzle to solve than if I were to pick up that palm hat and say, how do I make this look the way I want? I would be entirely lost, for one. Two, I would be doing a very similar approach probably to what you did. I'd be looking for a little bit more guidance and structure to how to do it than kind of going off the cuff. And I even do that still when I'm picking up a new technique. Like for me, chip carving is pretty new. So I did a bunch of poking around and talking to other craft workers who I know do it, and got some great things from them to practice the craft before putting it into practice. So yeah. I think it really just depends on kind of where you're coming from. And some of it too is just how people's brains are wired.
And see, for me, I think about it as painting. Like I enjoy painting, but I never did a lot of it as a kid, and I enjoy it, but I don't have that in my mind. So when I pick up a piece of fabric, in my mind, I can turn that into a shirt or a dress or a pair of shorts. Like my brain just works that way. But when I look at a blank piece of paper, I can see maybe the final picture, but I can't see how it got there. And that's what I'm trying to progress on with my painting, is moving away from, tracing out or copying from a picture that I've kind of set up on a computer and printing it out and going, hey, this is what I want to fill in, basically a paint by numbers, but a little bit more custom, until that point where I can go, I have these skills, I want to paint that, now I can just make it. And obviously you're well and truly with your skills, and it's great to see that that's how you approach your business, is like, I am an artist, and that's what I would classify your work as, because you are doing these one-off bespoke pieces. It's not that you couldn't do the other stuff, but you choose to do that at, I'm sure, the detriment of some work. Like you may miss out on some work because of those choices, but it's that commitment that I just really admire in you, that always trying to make everything as bespoke and as specific to that particular project before you move on to the next one.
That strictly speaks to my inability to focus and how bored I get. I can't do the same thing. Like that's the only reason. Let's be honest here. It's the only reason that I do one-off things is because I get bored easily. But it's interesting that you bring the art, kind of subject into it, because that is another thing that there's a lot of debate about. And there's actually a really awesome show that's on PBS, which is the public broadcasting system here in the States. It's called A Craftsman's Legacy. And the host of it is this guy who was a Wall Street banker and got sick of it, sick of the life, and started his own custom motorcycle shop. And he's intensely passionate about craftsmanship. And so he goes around the country to these different, craft workers, and, sees what they do and how they do it. And the one question he asks all of them is, do you consider yourself an artist or a craftsman? And it's really interesting to hear the different answers to that. And there's a lot of debate. Those aren't very clear delineations. And I got, I used to be fairly defensive about that. When people would call me an artist, I hated that. I'm not an artist. I can't do art. And so what I kind of settled on is that I identify as a craftsman. I feel that's what I am, but I can't deny that there is an element of artistry to what I do.
Absolutely.
That's how I've come to terms with it.
And I've actually got that as an idea, as a kind of, when we've got nothing on our workbench, I would love to sit down and have a chat and be about, what is an artist? What is a craftsman? What is a maker? What are all these things? And does it matter? How do they define us? Because there's a lot of gatekeeping out there where people are like, oh no, you can't be an artist unless you did this, or you can't be a maker unless you do this, or you can't be a craftsman. And some of that has some validity. Like you can't call yourself a master carpenter without, you know what I mean? And even just going through those terms, like what does a master mean? What does a journeyman mean? What does an apprentice mean? Like, what do these terms mean? Where do they come from? Because I think there's a lot to unpack there. And we've already touched on it. Like I consider most of what I do not an art. Like I don't consider making this hat an art, but I consider maybe making the YouTube video that goes with the making of that is my art piece, because that's the story that I'm trying to tell through a particular medium. And it obviously varies on project to project. So there's definitely a lot to unpack there. But I'm the same as you. Like when somebody calls me, oh, you're a great artist or something, not that I don't think anybody's actually done that, but if they did, I'd be like, oh, that's a bit weird. Like I just kind of throw some stuff together in it until I am happy with it. Because I think great art comes from a point of being self-critical. It's the difference between a good artist and a great artist is the great artist does a piece of work that takes him 2 years and throws it out because it's not good enough and then does it again. And it's just that ability to discern that it's just not good enough, which is why artists are never happy with their work and why I'm never happy with this hat. But and I think for a future episode, definitely, I think unpacking all those terms and what they mean and whether they should have as much value as they do or whether they don't have enough value in our modern society. Because you definitely go back 100 years and a craftsman that had a lot of weight for what that person was and who they were and their identity, for good and for bad. So, well,
I think maybe that should be on the docket for next week.
Okay,
to chat about, because
you won't have another project.
I've got some quality stories for that.
All right, well let's do that for the next episode. We won't get into it then here, and that's good. No pressure for me to come up with something else on my workbench. There'll be something. Yeah, I'm sure.
That's good. I probably need a week to clean up my mess, anyways.
Awesome. Well, as always, Chili, it's been great to talk to you today, and I love seeing metalwork because metalwork is something that I've only really been exposed to on TV or YouTube. Like we don't have a welder. I didn't grow up around welding. It's always been this black art to me that's, only special people get to go do that. Even though me and Miriam have both really wanted to try it. We just haven't had the project to justify getting the equipment or hiring the equipment or learning those skills, but it's definitely on the docket. So where can people find more of you and your work?
Yeah, so if you want to see more of what I'm working on or what I've done in the past, you can find me on YouTube and Facebook at Orwood Solutions, or on Instagram at OrwoodCS and OrwoodSolutions.com. Awesome. Where could I find you, Andrew?
So I am primarily on the YouTubes, craftybeetroot.com. The episode from last week with the wand, the lunar wand, that video is actually now up and live. So if you're interested in more details on that, check that out. But yeah, primarily YouTube is where I live, Crafty Beetroot, or www.craftybeetroot.com. So with that, we will catch you next week to not find out what's on your workbench, although I'm sure it will come up, but to have an in-depth discussion on maker and artist and craftsman terminology. Catch you later.